Hey friends, Jill here. Welcome back to Whispering Willow Farm. As you can see, I am in my greenhouse this morning. I've been kind of going through my inventory of plants, figuring out what's staying on the farm, figuring out what's going to go to the plant sale, and I noticed that my basil that I'm keeping for us is getting really tall, and it is time for me to start pruning them. This is something that typically I want to get a head start on now and do before we transition them out into the garden. Now, for many years, up until last year actually, I had never pruned basil. I didn't realize that pruning basil was a thing, but my basil was flowering really quickly and I wasn't getting as large of a yield as I would have preferred. The plants just weren't lasting that long, and then I started researching and figuring out that if you actually prune your basil, that your plant will last a lot longer. It produces a bushier plant instead of a taller plant, and you're just kind of redirecting the energy of your plant to go into producing the leaves instead of the flowers. So I'm going to show you guys that today, because this one simple, easy thing really kind of changed things for me. It allowed me to be harvesting basil for much longer in the season. I had healthier looking plants, and I thought, well, if this tip works so well for me, I wanted to share it with you guys. So I'm gonna go grab my basil and we'll get started. It is smelling mighty fine over here. Look at all these. So first of all, basil, if you guys don't know, some of you guys may be familiar, basil is an annual herb. Basil is also super easy to grow from seed. I start my own basil every single year, but a lot of times you can go to a nursery and they're not just planting one basil, they are just loading up their pots, and you're able to kind of, you know, spend a relatively low cost and get a whole bunch of basils and then come back home and separate it out. So although it is really easy to start from seed, maybe you don't have basil seed or that just is a bit too involved for you, usually you can get really good deals on these. I just, you know, try to look for the ones that have more than one basil in them, and I just come home and separate them out, is what I've done in the past as well. If you are starting your basil from seed, it likes that light fluffy soil much like most vegetables, so I use the same seed starting mix that I use with all of my other vegetables. When you move it out into the garden, it does prefer full sun, but if you're in a really hot climate where you have that harsh sun, maybe some afternoon shade's not a bad idea. What I do with most of my basil is I use it for companion plants. So what I like to do is I'll plant it in between my peppers or my tomatoes, and that way it still does well, but as those other plants start to get taller, it kind of offers a little bit of a shade, and I have found that that works really well for me. And so maybe that's something that you're thinking about doing as well, or you're in a hot climate, maybe just throw it in between some other taller varieties. So it's pretty typical, you know, to wait until your plant is a bit larger before you start pruning them. Like, I don't know, I usually wait until mine are like 4 inches tall. Obviously, when I've got little bitty basils, there's nothing to prune here, right? So it's not an exact number for me. It's not like, oh, it has to be 4 inches or it has to be 6 inches. Just once I show you how to prune basil, you'll know what to look for. And so this to me is getting really tall. This to me is getting really tall. I can already see that I want this to start redirecting its energy, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. So obviously you wouldn't be pruning a basil that was this small because it's just not a necessity. And so just wait until you have a plant that's a bit more mature. Kind of a rule of thumb to me is I just want to make sure that my basil has multiple sets of leaves. Once I've seen that it has, like you guys can see, here's a set of leaves, here's a set of leaves, that's kind of an indication to me that, okay, you're good to start pruning it. Golly, y'all, this smells so good. It smells so good. So that's kind of just an indication to, more so than the, you know, height or whatever. I kind of just look at the plant and decide, okay, yeah, it's time to start pruning that. All right, so I'm just going to kind of explain to you the part of the plant. So you have right here the main stem of the basil. So this is the main part of the basil plant. And then right here, if you guys can see these two little, the armpits of the plant, as I refer to them. And this right here would be your leaf nodes. And you guys, I think, can see that pretty well. So right here where it armpits out, that is considered a leaf node. So what I am actually going to do is I am going to snip off right above this leaf node. Now you can obviously decide which part of this plant you want to do. So I could technically snip off at this leaf node right here, and I'd have a much smaller plant. Or I could go ahead and snip off right up here above this leaf node, which is probably what I'm going to do right now. Right now I'm just going to take off a little. Your plants will look a little bit funny, especially if you're doing this before you have an established plant and it's not out in the garden yet. So I'm going to start with the idea of gradually doing this. So, and it depends on how leggy my plants are too. So like this is a pretty good and sturdy one. This one's a little bit leggy to me. So I could actually go through right here and snip off right above this one, which is gonna have me having a small plant. Or I could just go and just take the top part off, which is exactly what I'm gonna do. If your starts are not, you know, super big, you could just take your fingers and snip them off. You can take a pair of scissors and cut them off. I'm actually just using my small handled pruners because it's just a lot easier. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys what we're doing here. I've picked the leaf node. This is the main stem of the plant. I'm going to go through and cut right above that. Look at there. I have just topped this plant. Now the cool thing is too, when you're going through and you're doing this, I love the idea of nothing's wasted, right? Now I've got this beautiful, amazing Genovese basil, and by the time I get done pruning all my plants, I'm going to take this inside and I'm going to cook with it. I'm going to dry it. You know, there's a lot of different things you can do, and so it's this idea too of even though you're pruning it, you still can go ahead and use these. They're perfectly fine. They're obviously edible. And so just take it inside and cook with it. So now by cutting this off and it getting taller, this is encouraging my plant to not produce flowers. If you keep pruning and you keep doing this, your plant's never gonna flower, simply because the plant never lets it get to the stage where the flowers would develop and it would start bolting and going to seed. So instead of it growing taller and eventually putting out flowers much quicker, your plant thinks, okay, I just need to put all of my energy into producing vegetation for this plant, which is what it's doing by you clipping it off at this leaf nodes. Now the leaf nodes are going to grow out and it's just going to keep doing this. And as your plant gets bigger and bigger, the idea is you'll have more of these leaf nodes and you'll continue to do that and you'll have a bushy plant. I don't know about you guys, if you've ever grown basil in the past, it just keeps getting taller and it flowers quickly, but you really want this bushy plant because when it does that, it's putting all its energy into creating the leaves and not the flower. You're going to be able to have your basil plant producing actual basil leaves for a really long time. Alright, so let's go through and just snip all of these off. So right here on this plant particular, I'm going to cut right up here because again, I'm just not wanting to take a ton off. You guys can see that. Went ahead, cut that little guy off right here at the tip. Got some more. Look, it just looks, I know it looks kind of funny. I know, I understand that it looks kind of funny, but your plants are going to be really happy. A lot of these guys need a drink of water. This plant is a bit taller. It was closer to the outside edge of the greenhouse, so it's getting a lot more sun. So I'm actually going to cut this one down about right here. Alright, right above. Snip it off. Just right above, snip it off. There we go. Alright, so now you can see these plants are just going to grow out. You're just redirecting the energy. And so this was just off of 5 basil seedlings. Haven't even made it out into my garden. Look at all this basil. That's awesome. It smells really good too. Now say you were growing your basil indoor under some sort of grow light setup and you continue to do this process, you could honestly have basil like forever. I mean, the idea is it could last forever if you are providing it with the right conditions. Now obviously I'm outside, so eventually, you know, this is an annual herb. It will die and I'll have to replant it. But if I were doing this inside, it could last a really long time. I think that would be a really cool experiment. Just kind of have some sort of small grow light set up and just see how long I can keep basil growing from one plant if I keep pruning and I keep doing these things. The idea is to get the most out of your plant, right? So the idea for me of trying to just stretch this and see how far I could take it, how far it could go would be really cool. This season I will not be doing that experiment. These will be going out into the garden. I'll be pruning them just to make sure that they don't flower, they don't bolt quickly. I can get the most out of my plant as possible. But I will tell you, if this is something you've struggled with in the past, maybe your basil just gets really tall and goes to flowers quickly, try pruning your basil. You have a healthier plant, you have a bushier plant. It's obviously going to produce a lot more leaves because it's directing its energy going outward and producing new leaves instead of going upward and producing flowers. So I hope this really simple quick tip, like it was really quick for me to do this. Even if you have an established plant out in your garden, you can prune basil pretty quickly. As long as you have, you know, some of the right things, like pruners obviously make that a lot easier to do. But I hope this quick little tip was helpful for you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll talk to you soon.